Hey everyone. You ever catch yourself watching someone and thinking, wow, they are so wise. How do they do it? Well, today we're going deep on wisdom itself.
We talk about it all the time, but what even is wisdom really? It's more than just knowing a ton of stuff, right?
Totally. There's got to be some secret ingredient, right? Some mix of what you go through and how you see the world. And we've got this source that is so interesting. It dives into all that.
Yeah, like how do we even EDT-wise? Is it just our genes? And why should we care about recognizing wisdom at all?
It even says that sometimes younger people are the wise ones. That already has my mind blown.
Yeah, it's a good one. So, okay, it says wisdom isn't all in your DNA.
Hold up. So my parents giving good advice wasn't just because of their genes. What if I want to be wise without waiting a lifetime?
Right. It makes you think. And some smarts we do inherit, but real wisdom, that comes from more.
Okay, so picture those hunter-gatherer groups way back when. It wasn't just genes that made the elders wise, right?
Oh, for sure. You're right. It was knowing what to eat, what was going to make you sick. That super deep knowledge is what kept the whole group alive.
Exactly. Knowing your environment was like survival skill #1.
And the source makes this point. Imagine if those elders were all like, oh, the young folks will just figure it out, and never passed anything down.
Talk about a disaster waiting to happen. It makes you think, do we do that in LW?
Yeah.
Assume some wisdom is just common sense when it was actually hard to earn lessons.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it connects to how wisdom spreads. The source is big on culture's role stories, myths, even apprenticeships.
It's like the old master teaching the apprentice blacksmith. It's not just hit metal here. It's that whole way of thinking and solving problems.
Exactly. Like the apprentice is picking up how the metal changes when it's hot, not just the moves.
Then we invented writing, and bam, wisdom could travel way further.
Yeah.
But even now, going through hard stuff is huge, right?
Oh, totally. Like the source says, if it's always smooth sailing, you never learn how to navigate the rough seas.
Love that analogy. It's like without challenges, how do you build those skills for the tough times?
They even have this story about a woman who lost her whole business when the economy tanked.
Oh, wow.
But instead of giving up, she used that to become super resilient and smart with money. Then she started teaching other business owners how to survive, too.
It's like proof that the roughest times teach the best lessons. And speaking of learning, this source is who says only old people are wise?
Oh, yeah. It really pushes back on that.
Yeah.
Each generation has its own stuff to deal with and learns its own wisdom.
It's like younger people with all the tech stuff, they just get it in a way that's like magic to older folks. That's kind of wisdom for sure.
Absolutely. It's like a reminder to look for wisdom everywhere, not just where we expect it.
So if it's not just brains or age, what's this source saying is the heart of wisdom?
Okay, so it says wisdom is like this multifaceted thing. It's not just facts and figures. It's judgment, moral reasoning, that big picture thinking, and yeah, a whole lot of empathy too.
So you could be a straight-up genius, but if you don't have that wisdom to use your smarts
Well, you can make some bad choices for sure.
Totally. It's like the source says intelligence without wisdom is a powerful car with a bad driver. You might get somewhere, but probably not in one piece.
And that challenges the idea that you got to have all the fancy education to be wise, right?
Right. What about the person who never finished school but grows the best community garden ever?
Yeah.
They know the soil, the weather, how to help people. That's wisdom too.
That's a great example. And the source actually has a bunch more. But before we get into those...
Oh, yeah, let's hear them.
Okay.
But first, shouldn't we talk about what a wise society even means? What does that look like? What happens if we ignore wisdom on a bigger scale?
That is a crucial question. We've seen throughout history what happens when wisdom gets ignored, and it isn't pretty.
Oh, boy, this sounds ominous. Let's dive into that right after a quick go.
Yeah.
Okay, so we were just talking about how ignoring wisdom can lead to some serious problems. But you were going to share some examples of what happens when societies just don't listen to that inner voice of wisdom. What kind of stuff are we talking about here?
Well, one example that really stood out to me was this story about a small island community. They were warned by their elders about overfishing, taking too much from the sea. But they didn't listen. They wanted those short-term gains.
Oh, no. I can already see where this is going.
Right. It's like they forgot that age-old wisdom about respecting the balance of nature.
And I bet they learned the hard way.
They did. Within a few years, the fish stocks completely collapsed. There was famine, social unrest. It was a total disaster.
It's a harsh reminder that sometimes the old ways of doing things, the ones that have stood the test of time, they hold a deep kind of wisdom.
It's about understanding that wisdom isn't always flashy or new. It's often hidden in plain sight in the traditions and practices that have sustained communities for generations.
And it makes you realize that wisdom can be found in the most unexpected places. It's not always in a book or a lecture hall. It's in the lived experiences of people all around us.
Exactly. And speaking of unexpected places, the source actually brings up this really cool example from Africa, the concept of Ubuntu.
Oh, yeah, I remember that from the reading. It's like a different way of thinking about wisdom, right?
It is. In many African cultures, wisdom isn't just about what you know as an individual. It's about your connection to the community, your responsibility to others. A wise person in this context understands that their actions have ripple effects.
So it's like wisdom is about more than just your own personal knowledge. It's about how you contribute to the well-being of everyone around you.
It's a beautiful way to put it. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness and understanding that true wisdom lies in creating a world that benefits all.
So it's not about saying one culture is wiser than another, right?
No, not at all. It's more about appreciating the many different forms wisdom can take and being open to learning from those different perspectives.
It's like instead of ranking cultures, we should be celebrating the unique ways each one expresses and values wisdom.
Absolutely. And I think that brings us back to this idea of how do we get better at recognizing wisdom in others? You know, it's not always obvious.
Right. It's not like we can walk around with a wisdom detector and scan people's brains for it. How do we learn to spot it in our everyday lives?
That's the million-dollar question. The source suggests that we start by remembering what we talked about earlier about wisdom being more than just facts and figures. It's about judgment, empathy, seeing the big picture.
So maybe instead of looking for someone who has all the answers, we should be looking for people who embody those qualities.
Exactly. Do they listen more than they talk? Do they think carefully before they act? Do they consider different viewpoints before making a decision?
Are they willing to admit when they're wrong? Are they constantly learning and growing?
Those are all good signs. And remember, wisdom is often forged in the fires of adversity. Have they faced challenges in a way that's built resilience and compassion?
It's like we should be paying attention to how people handle the tough times, how they treat others, especially when they think no one is watching.
You're getting it. It's about looking beyond the surface and noticing those subtle but powerful indicators of wisdom.
This is so helpful. It's like we're learning to read a whole new language, the language of wisdom. And once you start to understand it, you realize it's all around us.
It is. And that's what this source is trying to show us. It's about shifting our focus from labels and titles to qualities and actions.
Instead of getting hung up on age or status, we should be looking for the substance of wisdom wherever it might be found.
Exactly. And this ties back to the idea that wisdom isn't exclusive to elders or academics. It's out there in the world waiting to be discovered.
We were talking about the farmer who knows more about nature than any textbook.
Yeah.
Or the person who's been through so much hardship and come out the other side with incredible compassion.
Exactly. What if we started looking for those hidden gems of wisdom in everyone we meet? The young activist fighting for change, the single parent working 2 jobs to make ends meet, the quiet observer who offers a unique perspective.
It's like that saying, everyone you meet knows something you don't. If we approached every interaction with that mindset, imagine how much we could learn.
It's about approaching the world with a sense of curiosity and wonder, a willingness to see the wisdom in the most unexpected places.
I love that. But I have one more question. If wisdom is so valuable, why do we so often miss it? Why do we ignore it, even when it's staring us right in the face?
That's a question that has baffled philosophers for centuries. But the source offers a few insights into why wisdom sometimes gets lost in the noise. And I think it's worth exploring those before we move on.
Okay, I'm all ears. Lay it on me.
Well, for one thing, our own egos can get in the way. It's easy to get attached to our own beliefs, our own ways of seeing the world.
To the point where we're not even willing to consider other perspectives.
Exactly. It's like we get so caught up in being right that we miss out on the opportunity to be wise. And this can be especially true when we encounter someone younger than us or from a different background.
It's like that unconscious bias that makes us dismiss their insights, simply because they haven't lived as long or haven't had the same experiences.
It's a trap we all fall into sometimes. But the source reminds us to constantly check our biases and be open to learning from everyone, regardless of their age or background.
Because wisdom can come from the most unexpected sources.
Absolutely. And another factor the source highlights is the sheer speed of our modern world. We're constantly bombarded with information running from one thing to the next. It's hard to slow down and really listen.
It's like we're scrolling through life on autopilot, missing those quiet moments of reflection where wisdom can really sink in.
You nailed it. That's why cultivating mindfulness is so important in this day and age. We need to create space for pause and reflection, for deep listening.
So it's not just about being open to wisdom, it's about actively seeking it out. creating the mental and emotional space to receive it.
Precisely. But then the question becomes, how do we know when wisdom is actually working? How do we measure its impact?
Right. It's one thing to talk about wisdom in theory, but what does it look like in practice? How do we see it manifesting in the real world?
That's a great question. And luckily, this source has some pretty amazing examples of wisdom and action stories that show how recognizing and applying wisdom can lead to tangible, positive change.
Okay, now you've got me really curious. Tell me more.
Well, one story that I think you'll find particularly inspiring is about this young woman who was working in a refugee camp. She noticed that many of the women there were incredibly skilled weavers, but they had no way to sell their goods.
It's like their talents and traditions were being wasted because they didn't have access to the right resources.
Exactly. But this woman, she saw an opportunity. She recognized the wisdom and potential within this community, and she came up with a brilliant solution.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. What did she do?
She helped the women set up an online marketplace to connect them with customers all over the world.
Oh, wow, that's incredible. So she saw a problem, recognized the untapped wisdom and skills of these women, and found a way to bridge the gap.
And the results were amazing. The women were able to earn a sustainable income, preserve their cultural heritage, and gain a sense of empowerment and agency.
That's what I'm talking about. That's wisdom in action, transforming lives and making the world a better place.
Yeah.
But let's be real for a second. What about when we ignore wisdom? What happens then?
The source doesn't shy away from the darker side of things. It reminds us of all those times throughout history when leaders ignored wise counsel and made decisions that had disastrous consequences.
Like starting wars without considering the long-term impact or ignoring warnings about climate change until it's almost too late.
Exactly. And those are just the big picture examples. It happens on smaller scales, too, all the time. Think about a company that dismisses the innovative ideas of its younger employees because they lack experience.
They could be missing out on a game-changing breakthrough simply because they fail to recognize the wisdom hidden in a fresh perspective.
It's a sobering thought. It makes you wonder how many brilliant ideas, how many potential solutions to the world's problems are being overlooked simply because we haven't learned to recognize wisdom in its many forms.
It's like we're so focused on the traditional markers of wisdom like age or status that we miss the real deal when it's right in front of us.
But the good news is, this deep dive has given us a new set of lenses through which to view the world. We're learning to see wisdom in unexpected places, to appreciate its diverse expressions, and to understand the consequences of ignoring it.
We're starting to realize that wisdom isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions, being open to different perspectives, and embracing the lessons hidden within challenges.
And perhaps most importantly, we're beginning to see that wisdom is not a destination, it's a journey, a lifelong process of learning, growing, and evolving.
It's about cultivating a mindset of curiosity, humility, and a willingness to learn from everyone we encounter.
Beautifully put. And now that we've laid this foundation, I think it's time to explore some real-world examples of wisdom in action. Stories that illustrate the power of wisdom to create positive change in the world.
Okay, you've definitely piqued my interest. Let's dive into those examples and see how wisdom can move beyond theory and into tangible, real-world impact. So we've been talking about how easy it is to just miss wisdom, with life being so busy.
Yeah.
But you were going to share some stories about what happens when people not only see wisdom, but actually use it. What's that look like?
Oh, yeah. So there's this really cool story in the source about a young woman working at a refugee camp. And she noticed all these women there were amazing weavers, like super skilled.
But I'm guessing they didn't have a way to sell their stuff or anything.
Exactly. It was like all this talent and tradition were just going to waste because they didn't have the right connections or resources.
It's like their wisdom was trapped.
Right. And this woman, she was like, this isn't right. So she helped them set up this whole online marketplace thing where they could sell their work directly to people all over the world.
That is so smart. So she saw the problem, saw the wisdom these women had, and then figured out a way to connect the dots.
And it totally worked. The women were able to make a living, keep their traditions alive, and they even felt more empowered, like they had control over their lives.
Okay, see, that's what I'm talking about. That's wisdom actually making a difference in the world. But let's be real for a sec. Those are the good stories. But what about when we ignore wisdom? What kind of stuff happens then?
Yeah, the source doesn't sugarcoat it. It talks about how, throughout history, leaders have ignored good advice and made choices that caused wars and economic disasters.
Like rushing into conflicts without thinking about the long-term effects or ignoring warnings about the environment until it's almost too late.
Exactly. It happens on smaller scales, too, all the time. Like, imagine a company that's like, nah, we don't need your new ideas, kid. You're too young. they could be missing out on something huge.
It's kind of scary to think about how many good ideas, how many solutions we might be missing out on, just because we don't recognize wisdom when we see it.
It really makes you think. But the good news is this whole deep dive has been like a training course in spotting wisdom. We've talked about where it comes from, the different ways it shows up, and what happens when we ignore it.
It's like we're learning to see the world with new eyes, realizing that wisdom isn't just about knowing stuff. It's about using that knowledge in a way that helps everyone.
And maybe the most important thing we've learned is that wisdom isn't something you just have or don't have. It's a journey, something you build over time.
It's about being curious about the world, listening to different perspectives, and being open to learning from every experience, even the tough ones.
I like that. So for everyone listening out there, remember, wisdom isn't just for experts or gurus. It's all around us if we know how to look for it.
It's in the stories of our elders, the experiences of our peers, even in the quiet moments of reflection.
Keep your minds open, your hearts curious, and never stop searching for those little sparks of wisdom.
You never know where you might find them. Well, that's about it for our deep dive into the world of wisdom. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, stay curious out there and stay wise.
This is DigitView.